So I've wanted to make this video for a little while now, and initially I just wanted to talk about a Final Fantasy 16 potential sequel and why that could be good for Square, depending on where their head is at in terms of the combat for the series going forward. But after seeing Square announce a Final Fantasy Tactics remaster, I decided why not expand the video out a bit more topic-wise and talk about Square's overall vision for the Final Fantasy franchise going forward. And also, with Square teasing something Chrono Trigger related, I felt why not bring that up also, as while that is not a Final Fantasy game, obviously, I think it's still important to talk about and bring up, as that does kind of show off Square's overall vision going forward if we do get a remake or remaster of that game. So starting with Final Fantasy X, Square began to make core changes to the gameplay of the Final Fantasy franchise, as with 10 they decided to go with the sphere grid leveling system rather than the traditional leveling and experience system of JRPGs. With 10 still being a traditional turn-based JRPG in just about every other area though, it really wasn't a dismissal from traditional norms that Final Fantasy fans grew to love, and the game received widespread acclaim from both fans and reviewers. Plus, with 10 launching on the PS2 and being a huge jump visually from all of the Final Fantasy games on the PS1, along with it being the first game in the series to have voice acting, a change like the sphere grid combined with the graphics and vocals felt like more of an innovative decision rather than an abandonment of traditions. 11 was where the real big changes began though. Starting with Final Fantasy 11, we saw two games that were MMORPGs, aka massively multiplayer online role-playing games, two games that were turn-based with changes to the gameplay compared to the gameplay of the classic Final Fantasy games, and also two games that weren't even turn-based at all. There hasn't been one consistent direction for the Final Fantasy franchise since the new millennium began, and as a result, the franchise has kind of found itself in an identity crisis. Fans have begged Square for the series to take on many different combat styles, with of course turn-based being the one that is the most requested, as many of the JRPG or Final Fantasy fans that loved the game back in the day are still avid JRPG fans. And Final Fantasy turn-based games can still sell well, as the Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster has sold over 5 million copies as of March 2025, and I think Square is probably very happy with that. With the game launching at a price of $75 in 2021, back before some publishers even adopted the jump to the $70 price tag that began in late 2020, the fact that the game sold as well as it did shows how passionate Final Fantasy and JRPG fans are for the series and the genre. And I'm sure getting 6 games for $75 also played a factor in the game selling the way it did as well. With a turn-based RPG like Claire Expedition 33 selling 3.3 million copies as of the last time that we heard a sales update from the game's team, it's clear that there's still a market for great RPGs. And if you make them, gamers will buy them, as Expedition 33 has obviously sold well, even in spite of the fact that the game was included in Xbox Game Pass for members to play if they were subscribed to the service. However, the real question is, does Square even want to make a turn-based Final Fantasy mainline game once again? I say that because I'm sure fear of dumping hundreds of millions of dollars into the development and promotion of a turn-based game just for it to flop sales-wise has held Square back from further pursuing turn-based mainline games in the series. But I think many fans would be thrilled with a great turn-based new entry in the Final Fantasy series, even if it required the game and production to be scaled back a bit. I've said many times on this channel that I really enjoyed 16, and if everything about 16 remained the same aside from the combat and the game was turned into a turn-based JRPG, there's no doubt in my mind that it would have been beloved by many fans who currently didn't enjoy it. So Square didn't have any issues with writing characters or story, it was more so just the gameplay in my eyes. Square of course is still releasing great turn-based games like the Saga, Octopath Traveler, and Bravely Default series of games, among many others. The difference is the development costs, as those games in those series are on more of a limited budget, while development for the most recent mainline Final Fantasy game, Final Fantasy 16, reportedly cost Square over $300 million. Meanwhile, the development cost of Expedition 33 is estimated to be at least 10 times less than that, as the development costs that I've seen thrown online for that game tend to range anywhere from 10 to 30 million. And that seems to be where the issue lies. Final Fantasy 16 failed to meet sales expectations for Square Enix, and after spending $300 million to develop and market the game, that certainly makes sense. Reason being is, despite Final Fantasy 16 selling 3 million copies in its first week on the market, which seems great, it's not until we bring up a story from this past March that some of you might remember that you actually realize how poorly the game sold for Square. It was reported back on March 13th of this year that Final Fantasy 16 had sold over 3.5 million units, So yes, the game has apparently only managed to sell 500,000 units ever since its 3 million unit launch week in June of 2023. So yeah, not good whatsoever. And of course, many people compare Final Fantasy XVI's combat style to the Devil May Cry series. And with Devil May Cry 5 selling over 10 million units, I'm sure Square looked at that and felt that a similar combat style mixed with the Final Fantasy IP probably would be enough to make Final Fantasy XVI a huge seller. But sadly for Square, that wasn't the case. Now on to the idea of a possible Final Fantasy XVI sequel. Financially, it wouldn't make sense for Square, with them being a publicly traded company and shareholder influence pretty much deciding everything that they do. I would say it'd be tough for them to justify a sequel to a game that underperformed sales and money-wise. Personally, I loved Final Fantasy XVI and thought it was a well-done game, but the fact that it felt more in line with Game of Thrones than a classic Final Fantasy game definitely turned many fans off also. And a Game Rant article in May discussed this, and while it was just an opinion piece and no confirmation of a sequel, it still had me thinking about what if a Final Fantasy XVI sequel was made. If Square wants to keep using FF16's combat style, then sure, I think they should contain it in its own series and make a sequel. And I say that as other styles, like the Final Fantasy VII Remake series' blend of action and command-based combat, has just remained in that series, and I assume that it will just remain in the series, as I doubt Square would bring that into Final Fantasy XVII. But hey, maybe I'll be wrong about that, I don't know. With that said, it's clear that fans were not satisfied with what Square delivered in Final Fantasy XVI, and I doubt that a sequel is on the table. With Square now testing the waters with a classic tactics game like Final Fantasy Tactics Remastered, and at the very minimum testing the waters with something Chrono Trigger related with the game's 30th anniversary coming up, maybe they can use this opportunity to introduce those two games to gamers who never experienced them. They could also use as a chance to see how fans really feel about these games in terms of any potential sequels for, say, a game like Final Fantasy Tactics. And I hope we get something more than just merchandise for Chrono Trigger's anniversary, as well as something more than just merchandise for Final Fantasy IX, because don't think I wasn't upset when there was no announcement for that game at any of the Summer Games showcases, and all we're left with right now is Final Fantasy IX anniversary merchandise. But yes, I think that Square can look at some of their other turn-based games that they've released and understand that a great turn-based game can still sell, and they do still sell. The issue though is that a lot of these Final Fantasy mainline games have so much sunken into them that they need a higher return than they do for, say, an Octopath Traveler or this Final Fantasy Tactics Remastered. With Expedition 33 selling well, and I'm sure even reinvigorating some gamers' love for turn-based combat games if they had fallen out of the genre, now would be a good time to test the waters with a 3D turn-based Final Fantasy mainline game, or even just a spin-off one if it has to be smaller in scope or smaller in budget opposed to a regular mainline game. I also think a lot of the newer generation of gamers might not be as keen as somebody like I would for a remaster or 2D turn-based game, so I do genuinely think a 3D turn-based Final Fantasy spin-off game with a budget that is smaller might sell better than something like Final Fantasy IX Remastered would. Final Fantasy Tactics Remastered was a surprising announcement, even despite hearing rumors of it for quite a while now, but it's definitely an appreciated announcement nonetheless. I played Tactics Advance on my Game Boy Advance back in the day, and I do hope it sells well, so hopefully we get a brand new entry in that series. But I personally don't know how well a tactics game will sell nowadays. I will say though that it was announced in 2022 that a tactics game, Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle, had over 10 million unique players play the game. Also, Mario plus Rabbids Sparks of Hope sold worse, yet still sold over 3 million copies. And I think the first game sold so well because of the name recognition of Super Mario, and it also was one of the very few Nintendo games out during the launch year of the Switch, along with how visually well done the art style of that game was. I don't think it's crazy for me to say though that sadly I believe Final Fantasy Tactics is less approachable to younger gamers than of course Mario plus Rabbids was, due to the name recognition among many other factors. In terms of another Final Fantasy remaster, this time with Final Fantasy IX Remastered, I said before that yeah, it hurt to get no announcement at any of these summer showcases, and a big reason for that is because I don't think we'll get an announcement prior to the release of Final Fantasy Tactics, because I don't think they want that game to interfere with the marketing or just any hype potentially around that game's release in September. Square did release a new Final Fantasy VII Rebirth trailer at the time during Summer Games Fest in 2023, which was just weeks before Final Fantasy XVI's release. So hey, maybe, I don't know, maybe we do get some kind of information on Final Fantasy IX Remastered during the anniversary of the game in July. Regardless though, the direction for the Final Fantasy franchise has really been all over the place. And despite loving all the games that we've gotten out of the franchise as of late, I definitely would be down for a big 3D open world Final Fantasy turn-based game. And my thing is, I have no issue with any of the new style of combats that they've had in terms of just the Final Fantasy VII Remake series or Final Fantasy 16, but I would love if they could also keep a lot of the turn-based Final Fantasy games around, as I love a lot of Square's other turn-based games, like I said, in terms of Octopath Traveler, Bravely Default, etc., but I would love to get turn-based Final Fantasy games as well as the other combat styles. Expedition 33 brought back that feeling you got when you played a game like Final Fantasy X, Legend of Dragoon, Lost Odyssey, etc. for the first time, and the thing is, no matter how much I've enjoyed a lot of these recent Final Fantasy games, they just didn't bring back a feeling similar to the one that I got when I played any of those previously mentioned games. There was a unique nature to Expedition 33 that I personally felt it had, and a lot of that was because of how well done the story, music, and environments were, but also how much fun the gameplay was. I think another part of it is simply because Expedition 33 is really just one of the best RPGs that we've seen in a long time. When a game has you feeling like a kid again, and has you thinking about it even after you stop playing it, that's truly a special feeling and just a sign of an incredible game. And I believe Square Enix can reignite that feeling in many gamers once again, for all of the ones who played their Final Fantasy games back in the day and fell in love with their series for so many different reasons. I get that Square views non-turn-based combat as a way to reach a broader audience, but even without turn-based combat, Final Fantasy has failed to reach Square's sales expectations as of late. With turn-based not being as popular of a choice nowadays, and I personally know a lot of people who don't play turn-based outside of Pokemon games, I do still believe Square could make a great turn-based game and make it work. As while Final Fantasy 15 was not a turn-based game, it sold over 10 million copies, and it shows that a well-done game with the Final Fantasy IP on it could sell over 10 million units still. I doubt that Final Fantasy 17 will be the turn-based 3D game that I'm hoping for, but maybe I'll be wrong, or hopefully we get a great spin-off game in the series very soon. I want to know your feelings on anything Final Fantasy related or any of the games that I mentioned in this video down below in the comments section. If you enjoyed the video, then I'd really appreciate if you could give it a like, and if you're new to the channel, then I'd appreciate if you hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all the future gaming content on my channel. Thank you so much for watching though, and I am out. Peace.